Vivid verses.
The first sign was small enough that I almost let it go. 3 months ago, maybe 4, I'd stopped marking the calendar in my head a while back, which should have told me something on its own. We were at the kitchen counter, and I'd said something about the contractor pushing back our patio timeline again, and she'd rolled her eyes. Not at the contractor, at me. A half-second flick of the eyes toward the ceiling like I was a buffering video. She had to wait out. I noticed. I always notice. It's not a skill I cultivated. It's just how my mind works. Cataloging small data points the way other people catalog grocery lists. I filed it away and said nothing because one eye roll is noise, not signal. You don't restructure your life around noise. But then it happened again, and again, with increasing frequency, like a heartbeat picking up pace before some larger exertion. She cut me off mid-sentence at dinner with her sister, finishing my thought for me in a tone that made the thought sound stupid even though it hadn't been. She'd laugh at things I said that weren't jokes, then look surprised when I didn't laugh along, as if I'd missed my own punchline. Small dismissals, the kind designed to be deniable if I ever brought them up. I was just teasing, "You're so sensitive lately." I didn't mean anything by it. I never brought them up. Not because I couldn't handle confrontation, but because confrontation over individually deniable moments is a losing game. You end up arguing about whether something happened instead of why it's happening. I wanted to understand the why first. So I watched. This is the part people misunderstand about me. The people who've called me passive over the years, usually right before they discover I'm not. Watching isn't the same as tolerating. Watching is data collection. I was running a quiet diagnostic on a relationship, the way you'd listen to an engine ticking wrong before deciding whether it's a loose belt or something structural. I didn't get angry during this phase because anger would have meant I'd already concluded something, and I hadn't yet. I was still gathering. What I was gathering over those weeks was a pattern. The dismissals weren't random. They spiked when other people were around. Her sister, her friend from the gym, the neighbors we sometimes had over for drinks. In private, she was nearly normal, occasionally affectionate, even like a switch flipped back when the audience left. That told me something important. This wasn't really about anything I was doing. It was about what she needed other people to see. She needed an audience for the disrespect to mean anything to her, which meant it wasn't really about disrespecting me at all. It was about performing something, proving something, maybe to herself. I considered several explanations. Boredom, the most common culprit in long relationships, the slow erosion of charge between two people who've simply run out of novelty. But boredom doesn't perform, it withdraws. This wasn't withdrawal. This was active. I considered stress, work, family, something private she wasn't telling me. But stress doesn't selectively target an audience either. If she were drowning in something internal, the dismissals would have shown up everywhere, flat and constant, not switched on and off depending on who was in the room, which left the explanation I didn't want to land on, but kept circling back to anyway. She was testing something. Testing me, testing the relationship's tensile strength, maybe testing whether she still had power over a reaction she used to be able to provoke easily. People do this more often than they admit. They push not because they want the relationship to break, but because they want proof it won't. The trouble is, the test only works if the other person doesn't actually have an exit already forming in his mind. And mine was forming. Slowly, but it was forming. I didn't tell her any of this. I didn't accuse her of testing me, because an accusation gives the other person something to push against, something to deny or twist into you're being paranoid. Instead, I kept doing what I'd been doing, being even-keeled, responsive, present, not performing patience, actually being patient, because patience, real patience, isn't suppressed anger waiting to detonate. It's the absence of urgency to react before you understand. I genuinely didn't know yet what this was, so I waited to know. The family gathering was supposed to be ordinary. Her cousin was having people over, a backyard thing, string lights, a folding table sagging under potato salad, and a cooler of drinks. Somebody's portable speaker running a playlist that skewed more party than the actual size of the party justified. 20, 25 people, maybe. And some lawn chairs. Kids chasing each other around the side yard. The kind of evening that should have been forgettable in the best way. I want to be precise about what happened, because precision matters to me, and because what happened deserves to be described exactly as it was, without the embellishment anger usually adds to memory. We arrived together. For the first hour, things were fine, better than fine even. She introduced me to a cousin's new boyfriend, made a joke that landed, put her hand on my forearm while she laughed at something her aunt said. I remember thinking, maybe I'd misjudged the trajectory. Maybe the weeks before had been a rough patch working itself out, rather than a slope leading somewhere worse. Then, the music shifted. Someone changed the playlist to something with more bass, and she drifted toward a knot of people near the speaker. I didn't think anything of it. People migrate toward music at parties. That's not data, that's physics. But I kept half an eye on her, the way you do with someone you care about in a crowd. Not surveillance, just awareness. And I watched her start dancing. Nothing wrong with dancing. I want to be fair here, because fairness matters even in retrospect, even after everything that came next. Dancing at a family party isn't a crime, isn't even a yellow flag on its own. What became a flag was who she was dancing with, and how, and where her eyes went while she did it. There were two men in that cluster, one her cousin's co-worker, one I'd met maybe twice before, a friend of a friend type whose name I've since deliberately let myself forget. She danced with both of them in turn, closer than the song required, her back against one of them at one point, hips moving in a way that had nothing to do with rhythm and everything to do with display. And the display had a direction. Every few seconds, her eyes would flick across the yard, toward me. That's the detail that did it, not the dancing itself. People dance loosely at parties. Alcohol loosens hips along with judgment. I've allowed for all of that in the time since. It was the checking. The glances weren't incidental. They were aimed. She wasn't lost in a song. She was watching to see if I was watching, which meant the entire performance existed for an audience of one, and that audience was me. I sat with that for a moment, turning it over with the same analytical distance I'd applied to the weeks before. What does it mean when someone manufactures a public moment specifically calibrated to provoke their partner, then checks repeatedly to confirm the provocation landed? It means the dismissals from the past weeks hadn't been testing whether I'd react. They've been training me not to. And this was the actual test, the real one. She'd spent weeks establishing that small disrespects wouldn't get a reaction, and now she was running the experiment at scale, in public, in front of family, to see if there was a ceiling, to see if I had a floor at all, or if I just keep absorbing whatever she put in front of me indefinitely. I felt something cold and clear settle into place behind my sternum. Not rage. Rage is hot, disorganized, makes you say things you have to apologize for later. This was different. This was clarity, the specific kind that arrives right before a decision rather than during an emotional flood. I felt it exactly a handful of times in my life, usually at junctions where continuing to deliberate would itself be a kind of cowardice. I thought, with something close to detachment, she has just told me, in the clearest language she has, that she doesn't respect me anymore. Not might not, doesn't. Respect isn't something you accidentally misplace for an evening. It's something you erode through small choices until one day you're standing in a backyard grinding against a stranger to see if your partner will finally crack. The fact that she needed witnesses for this meant she wanted it to cost me something specific, dignity in front of people who knew us both. That's not confusion. That's intent. even if she'd never say it that plainly to herself. I ran through my options the way I run through any decision with real consequences, fast, but not rushed, each branch evaluated and discarded almost as quickly as it appeared. Option 1. Cross the yard, pull her aside, say something. Discard immediately. Confrontation in that setting hands her exactly what she's fishing for. A reaction, an audience for the reaction, the chance to recast me afterward as the jealous one, the controlling one, the guy who can't handle his girlfriend having fun. Any version of me storming over their loses before it starts, regardless of how justified it would be. Option 2. Dance with someone else myself. Return a volley. Discard. Heady, reactive, exactly the kind of move that signals I'm playing her game on her terms. It would also be dishonest. I didn't want to dance with anyone else. I wanted to leave, and doing something I didn't actually want to do just to make a point is its own kind of self-betrayal. Option 3. Stay smile, pretend I hadn't noticed, absorb it like I'd absorbed everything else. Discard, immediately and completely. That option was the one that had gotten us here in the first place. More absorption just teaches her the ceiling is higher than she thought. I was done being a data point in that particular experiment. Option 4. Leave. Quietly, cleanly, without a scene, without giving her the satisfaction of a visible reaction to report back to herself later as proof she still had that kind of control over me. That was the only option that made sense, and once I saw it clearly, I didn't deliberate any further. Deliberation past the point of clarity is just anxiety wearing a thinking cap. I didn't storm off. I want to be precise about that too, because the manner mattered as much as the decision. I found her cousin, the host, thanked her for having us, said I had an early start and needed to head out. True enough, in the sense that everything after that night would, in fact, start early. I said it warmly. I meant the warmth. Her cousin had nothing to do with any of this. I did not look for my girlfriend to say goodbye. I did not seek out one last glance to see if she'd noticed me leaving. That would have given the moment a charge I didn't want it to have. I simply walked to my car, got in, and drove home in a silence that felt less like emptiness and more like the quiet right after a decision has already been made and there's nothing left to argue with yourself about. The drive gave me time to think, and I used it the way I use all unstructured time when something significant needs processing, methodically, without melodrama. I didn't replay the dancing on a loop, didn't torture myself at the visual. I'd already extracted what I needed from it, the conclusion. Replaying it further would have been indulgence, not analysis. What occupied me instead was logistics, because by the time I hit the highway, I'd already moved past the question of whether to leave and into the question of how, and how mattered enormously. I'm not a person who believes in long goodbyes once the goodbye has already, functionally, happened. Months of conversations, ultimatums, couples therapy, slow-motion arguments about respect and boundaries. All of that assumes there's something left to negotiate. There wasn't. She'd shown me, with total clarity, exactly where she stood. The only thing left to decide was the manner of my response. And I wanted that manner to communicate something she couldn't talk her way around afterward. Not cruelty. Finality. There's a difference, even if it doesn't always feel that way to the person on the receiving end. I got home a little after 10. The house was dark, exactly as I'd left it, and for a moment I just stood in the front hallway letting the quiet settle. Our life was in that house. 2 years of it, give or take, of small accumulated decisions about paint colors and which drawer the chargers lived in and where the good knives went. I felt something that wasn't quite grief yet, more like the recognition of grief's shape, off in the distance, waiting for me to have time for it later. I didn't have time for it that night. That night required precision, not feeling. I started in the bedroom because that's where the largest concentration of her things lived, and because starting with the hardest room meant everything after it would feel easier by comparison. I found the boxes in the garage. We kept a stack from the last move, flattened and leaning against the wall, the kind of foresight that now felt almost eerily convenient, though I think the truth is simpler. I kept those boxes because some part of me had already been planning for an exit longer than I'd consciously admitted. Maybe the diagnostic phase of the last few weeks hadn't really been about figuring out what was happening. Maybe it had been about giving myself permission to act on what I already knew. I worked room by room, fast but careful, treating her belongings with more respect than the evening had earned, because the point was never to punish her through her possessions. Punishment would have meant tossing things into boxes haphazardly, cracking a frame here, leaving a shoe behind there, small cruelties disguised as carelessness. I didn't do any of that. I folded her clothes the way she folds them, by color, the way I'd watched her do 100 times without really thinking about it until that night, when a habit surfaced from memory and guided my hands. I wrapped the ceramic mug from her grandmother in 2 dish towels before setting it in a box, because that mug mattered to her and meant nothing to me except as a marker of something she'd be devastated to find broken. I gathered her makeup from the bathroom counter into a clear bag, gathered her books from the shelf in the den. The ones that were unambiguously hers, not the ones we'd bought together or that I'd read first and passed to her, and gathered the framed photo of her parent from the nightstand, setting it face up on top of the box so it wouldn't be the thing that got crushed if anything shifted. This wasn't kindness performed for her benefit, since she wasn't there to see it. It was something closer to self-respect. I wanted to be able to look back on that night, whenever I did, and know I'd acted like the man I believed myself to be, decisive but not vindictive. There's a particular kind of clean conscience that comes from ending something badly behaved toward you, without yourself behaving badly in return. I wanted that. I think in some unspoken way, I wanted it more than I wanted her to suffer, though I won't pretend the second thing wasn't somewhere in the mix too. It took longer than I expected. 2 years compresses into more cardboard than you'd think, especially once you start accounting for things you'd both forgotten existed, things that surface only when you're forced to take an actual inventory of shared life. A blender she bought before we met. A stack of her work files, jumbled in with mine until I had to actually read titles to sort them apart. A box of birthday cards, some for me, that I left untouched because cruelty towards sentiment isn't decisiveness, it's just cruelty. By the time I finished, the garage looked less like a teardown and more like a careful inventory. Boxes stacked along one wall in neat columns, labeled in marker with simple categories: clothes, bathroom, books/personal, kitchen items, misc. I'd arranged them so the first thing she'd see, if she opened that garage door, was order. Not chaos, not rage scrawled across cardboard, not anything she could photograph and send her sister as evidence that I'd lost it. Just the visual proof that a decision had been made, calmly, completely, and was not up for discussion. The locks were the last piece, and I'd thought about that step longer than any other because it was the part most likely to be read as aggressive if executed wrong. I didn't want it to feel like punishment or like I was locking her out of a life she still had a claim to. I wanted it to feel like what it actually was, the practical expression of an ending that had already happened in every way that mattered, hours earlier in a backyard without either of us saying a word. I found an emergency locksmith service online, one of those 24-hour outfits that exist for exactly this kind of unglamorous urgency, lockouts and divorces, and the occasional paranoid homeowner, and had someone out within the hour. I told him simply that I needed the front and back locks rekeyed, no further explanation offered or asked for. He didn't need my reasons. I paid him, watched him work, tested both keys myself once he'd gone, turning each in its new mechanism slowly, deliberately, the small click of the bolt sliding home oddly satisfying in a way I hadn't anticipated. It was nearly 4 in the morning by the time I finished. I didn't sleep so much as exist horizontally for a few hours, mind still running quiet diagnostics on a situation that no longer required them. I want to address something here because I think it matters to understanding the kind of man I am rather than the kind of man this story might make me sound like if told wrong. I never once, during any of this, felt the urge to call her. Not to gloat, not to explain myself, not even to ask the question that some smaller, less disciplined version of me might have wanted answered. Why did you do that? What were you trying to prove? I didn't need the answer anymore. The dancing had been the answer. Everything else would just be her trying to recontextualize something that didn't need recontextualizing. I also didn't tell anyone what I was doing that night. No calls to friends for moral support. No venting text to anyone who might have talked me into reconsidering or, worse, talked me into escalating. This wasn't a decision that needed outside validation, and seeking it would have suggested some part of me wasn't sure. I was sure. I've been sure since the moment in that backyard when I understood exactly what her glances had been checking for. She texted around 6 the next evening, the kind of text that announces itself before you even open it just from the preview on the lock screen. Hey, you left without saying by last night. Everything okay? I read it standing in the kitchen, coffee in hand, and felt the particular calm of someone reading a message from a situation that's already resolved itself. The sender just doesn't know it yet. I didn't respond, not out of cruelty and not out of some manipulative instinct to make her sweat for effect. I want to be honest that there was some grim satisfaction in the silence, but that wasn't the primary reason for it. The primary reason was simpler. There was nothing useful to say over text that wouldn't either start an argument I had no interest in having remotely or soften something that needed, for both our sakes, to land at full weight. Some messages are better delivered by absence. The absence itself is the message. She tried again 20 minutes later. Are you mad about something? Can we talk? I watched the message arrive and felt nothing sharp. No satisfaction, no anger. Just the flat patience of someone waiting for a scene that's already been blocked out to play to its natural conclusion. I didn't respond to that one either. I knew she'd come home eventually. It was still her residence, technically, in every sense except the one that mattered now. I made dinner, ate it slowly, read for a while, and waited with the specific stillness of a man who has already done the difficult part and is simply waiting for the world to catch up to a decision it doesn't yet know about. She arrived a little after 8. I heard her car in the driveway first, the particular rhythm of her engine cutting off, the door, the familiar weight of her steps on the front walk. Then I heard the part I'd been waiting for without quite admitting to myself that I was waiting for it. The scrape and click of a key that no longer fit a lock that no longer recognized it. I didn't go to the door immediately. I let her try twice because the second attempt is usually the one that breaks through denial. The first try, people assume user error, a key caught wrong in a pocket, a misremembered angle. The second failure is the one that starts asking real questions. I heard her knock. Not pound. Not yet a normal knock. The kind you'd give your own front door out of habit before remembering you don't actually need a knock on your own front door. Hello. The key's not working. A pause. Then, with an edge creeping in, is this a joke? I opened the door then, because there was no further purpose in delay, and delay past the point of necessity starts to look like theater rather than resolve. I wanted this to be resolve, clean and total, not a performance. She stood on the front step in the porch light, still in the dress from whatever she'd worn to work that day, purse slung over one shoulder, the useless key still pinched between two fingers like she hadn't quite processed that it wasn't going to suddenly start working if she just stood there holding it long enough. Hey, I said, even. Not cold, not warm. A factual tone, the tone you'd use to confirm an appointment. What is this? She held up the key, gesturing at the door like I might not understand what she meant. Why isn't my key working? Because the locks are new, I said. I watched the information land, watched her mind do the thing minds do when reality refuses to match the script they prepared on the drive home. Because I was certain she prepared one, some opening line meant to address my silence from the night before, maybe an apology calibrated to sound sincere without actually conceding much, maybe an offense taken at my leaving without saying goodbye, flipping the narrative so she'd be the wrong party walking through that door. Whatever she'd built on the way here, it wasn't built for this. You changed the locks, she said, like saying it aloud might reveal it to be less true than it was. I did. Why would you? She stopped herself, recalibrating, and I watched her try a different angle, the kind of pivot I half expected. Okay, look, if this is about last night, I think you're overreacting. It was a party. I was dancing. People dance at parties. There it was. The deniability play, the one she'd probably been rehearsing the whole drive over, the one designed to make my response sound disproportionate to a perfectly innocent activity. I felt the old instinct to explain myself rise up, the urge to lay out, point by point, the eye rolls and the dismissals and the checking glances across the yard, to build the case so thoroughly she couldn't wriggle out from under it. I let the instinct rise and then let it pass without acting on it, because explaining myself at this point would have implied the decision was still open for debate. It wasn't. Explaining it would have been a kind of negotiation, and there was nothing left to negotiate. You're right, I said instead. People do dance at parties. She blinked, thrown by the agreement, clearly braced for an argument she now didn't have the shape of. So then why? I'm not interested in relitigating last night, I said, or the weeks before it. I watched. I understood what I needed to understand. This isn't a conversation where I'm asking you to explain yourself, because there's nothing you could say that changes what I already decided. Decided what? Her voice climbed a register, somewhere between disbelief and the first true note of fear I'd heard from her, the kind of fear that comes when someone realizes the ground they assumed was solid has already given way beneath them, and they're only now noticing the fall. You're acting like you can't just lock me out of my own house because you didn't like how I danced at my cousin's party. I'm not locking you out because of how you danced, I said. I'm locking you out because of what the dancing told me. Those are different things, and I think you know they're different things, even if it's more comfortable to argue about the first one. She tried another approach, and I almost respected the speed of the pivot, even as I recognized exactly what it was. Okay, I'm sorry, all right? I shouldn't have done that. It was stupid. I'd had a couple drinks. It didn't mean anything. Can we please just talk about this like adults? You can't just throw away 2 years over one party. I noted, with the same detached precision I'd applied to everything else that week, that this was the first time in our entire relationship I'd heard her apologize without qualifying it into non-existence in the same breath. It would have meant something a few weeks earlier. It meant nothing now, not because apologies can't matter, but because this one wasn't actually about the dancing. It was about the locks. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was alarmed by what it had cost, which is a different emotion wearing the same words. It's not about one party, I said. It's about weeks of you deciding I was someone you didn't have to take seriously anymore. The eye rolls. Finishing my sentences like I was an idiot. Last night was just the loudest version of something you'd been telling me quietly for a while. I heard all of it. I just didn't react to any of it until I understood what it actually was. That's not. I never said I didn't respect you. You didn't have to say it, I said. You showed me. That's actually more honest than saying it, even if you didn't mean it as honesty. People don't usually lie with their behavior the way they lie with words. She set her purse down on the step, like she was settling in for a longer fight, like proximity and time might wear down a decision that had nothing to do with either. So that's it. No conversation, no chance to fix it. You just boxes and new locks like I'm some stranger. There were chances, I said. Weeks of them. Every time I let one of those moments go without saying anything, that was a chance for you to notice on your own and adjust. You didn't. Last night wasn't a mistake you made once. It was the conclusion of a pattern you'd been building for a while, in front of an audience, specifically so I'd see it. I think some part of you wanted to know if there was a line. There was. You found it. This is insane, she said, and her voice had a wet edge to it now, the kind that comes right before tears, though I noted, almost against my will, that the tears felt aimed rather than purely involuntary. Not fake, necessarily, but timed, the way certain emotional weather only arrives once a person realizes the audience isn't responding the way they planned. You're really going to end 2 years over this? Without even fighting for it. I'm not interested in fighting for something that's already shown me what it's become, I said. Fighting for a relationship is worth doing when both people still respect each other and just need to find their way back to it. That's not what last night was. Last night was you testing whether I had a floor. I do. You found it. There's no version of this where I unfind it just because you're upset that the consequence is real. She was quiet for a moment, and I watched something shift in her expression. Not acceptance yet, but the early architecture of it. The recognition that the man standing in this doorway wasn't going to be argued, cried, or guilted back into the version of himself who absorbed things indefinitely. I think in that quiet, she finally understood what I'd known for weeks and what she was only now confronting in real time. That my calm had never been weakness. It had been observation. And observation, once it concludes, becomes decision, and decision, in my case, becomes action, clean, immediate, without the long, messy middle where most people get talked out of doing what they already know they need to do. So what? I don't even get my stuff? She asked, quieter now, the fight starting to drain out and something more practical taking its place. Everything's in the garage, I said. Boxed, labeled. Nothing's missing, nothing's damaged. You can take it whenever you want, today, tomorrow. I don't need to be here for it. I'm not interested in making this harder than it has to be. I just need it to be over. You boxed all my stuff up. Last night, she stopped doing the math, realizing the timeline meant I hadn't agonized over this for hours of sleepless second-guessing. I'd simply gone home and done it methodically the same night before the anger even had a chance to cool in a doubt, because there had been no anger to cool in the first place. Just clarity, acted on promptly, because clarity has a shelf life, and I didn't want to waste mine arguing myself out of what I already knew. Yes, I said. You didn't even give yourself a night to think about it? To see if you were overreacting? I'd already thought about it, I said. For weeks. Last night didn't start the thinking. It finished it. She looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her searching my face for some crack, some flicker of the man who used to let things go, who used to absorb the eye rolls and the dismissals without comment, hoping that if she found him, she could still talk her way back through that door. She didn't find him. He wasn't gone. Exactly. He was simply not in charge of this decision. The version of me standing in that doorway was the one who'd been quietly tallying for weeks, who'd finally finished his calculation, and who had no further use for the patience that had governed every interaction before tonight. I don't even get a chance, she said finally, and it wasn't really a question anymore. You had weeks of chances, I said. You spent them proving something else. She picked her purse back up off the step, slow, like her hands hadn't fully caught up to what the rest of her already understood. Fine, she said, and there was an attempt at composure in it that didn't quite hold, a tremor underneath the word. Fine. I'll get someone to help me with the boxes tomorrow. That's fine, I said. I'll leave the garage code with the neighbor if you'd rather not deal with me directly. Whatever's easier. She almost said something else, I watched it gather behind her eyes, some last appeal or last accusation. The kind of thing people reach for when they sense a door closing and want one final attempt to wedge a hand in before it does. But she didn't say it. Maybe she finally understood that there was no version of any sentence that would change what was already finished, that the time for sentences to matter had passed sometime around 4 in the morning, somewhere between the third box and the new lock clicking into place. She turned and walked back to her car, the useless key still in her hand, like she hadn't yet figured out where else to put it. I closed the door. Not slammed, closed evenly the same way I'd done everything else in the last 24 hours, without flourish, without needing the moment to look like anything other than what it was. I stood in the front hallway for a second, listening to her car start, listening to it pull out of the driveway and fade down the street, and felt the particular quiet that follows a decision executed completely, with nothing left undone and nothing left unsaid that needed saying. I told her the truth. There were no second chances coming, because second chances require a continued investment of trust, and trust isn't something you extend indefinitely to someone actively testing how much of it they can erode before you stop them. My silence over those weeks hadn't been acceptance. It had been the quiet work of a man already calculating his exit, weighing the data, waiting only for the moment the pattern became undeniable enough to act on without doubt. The backyard had given me that moment. Everything after it had simply been execution.
Thanks for listening.